There is a silent phenomenon that acts almost invisibly in the male mind, a powerful, profound, and extremely seductive psychological mechanism that traps even the most intelligent men in toxic relationships. It doesn't matter how much he knows it's harmful. It doesn't matter how many times his friends warn him. It doesn't matter how many nights he spends awake, feeling like he's losing himself. There's something there, something subtle, something almost irresistible that makes him stay. Something that settles inside him like an emotional promise that never arrives but never disappears. This mechanism is so strong because it acts where the man is most vulnerable, in the sensation of reward. He doesn't get trapped by suffering. He gets trapped by the small doses of relief, validation, affection, and attention that arise unpredictably. A woman who one moment destroys him with criticism, coldness, or indifference, and the next moment envelopes him with sweet messages, sudden caresses, or strategically placed, "I love you." This emotional roller coaster creates an addictive cycle. His mind gets used to expecting the emotional reward, even if it comes after long periods of pain. And this pattern is so dangerous precisely because it mimics the mechanism of addictions. Unpredictable stimuli generate the most intense bonds. He doesn't know when he will receive a little affection, a little calm, a little validation. And it is precisely this unpredictability that traps him. His mind associates waiting with love, pain with desire, absence with hope. He convinces himself that this time will be different, even if, deep down, he knows it won't be. The toxic woman, consciously or not, understands this power. She gives the exact dose of affection to keep him emotionally attached, to prevent him from completely disconnecting, to make him continue trying, investing, wearing himself out in the attempt to return to what it was in the beginning. But the beginning doesn't come back, because the beginning was the bait. The real relationship is what he lives today. Emotional exhaustion, constant doubt, effort that never returns in the same measure. Still, he stays because the reward mechanism keeps him in the illusion that he is almost being loved the way he deserves. And the cruelest part? Good men confuse effort with value. They believe that if they don't give up, they will finally be recognized. But what they don't realize is that this cycle exists precisely because they don't give up. The toxic relationship depends on their hope. And as long as that hope exists, liberation doesn't happen. If you're listening to this and felt something inside you, know this, it's not your weakness. It's a powerful psychological conditioning. And understanding this mechanism is the first step to breaking the cycle that is silently draining you. If any part of this chapter spoke directly to your reality, subscribe to the channel to receive a free guide on how to identify and break the emotional patterns that trap men in draining relationships. Don't continue alone in this fight. There is a way out, and it begins with clarity. To understand why the reward mechanism works so devastatingly requires understanding the emotional gears that sustain it, artificially created neediness. Good, sensitive, loyal, and dedicated men don't enter toxic relationships by nature. They're led into them. And this journey begins with a subtle, yet powerful, emotional engineering done by the other person. They quickly learn where your self-esteem thrives, where your confidence flourishes, and, most importantly, where your sensitivity hides old wounds. In the beginning, everything is abundant. Constant attention, deep messages, shared interests, spontaneous affection. They give you exactly what your emotions have always desired and give in excess. It is at this moment that they collect emotional information. What makes you happy? What calms you? What makes you feel seen? They silently observe which small gestures generate big reactions in you. And when they discover this, they keep it. They mentally note it, because later, this will be used as a currency of control. Then, when they realize that you are emotionally involved, the movement changes. the same attention that was previously given. Abundant affection begins to disappear. Not completely, not abruptly, but enough for you to miss it. The same sweetness that once made you smile begins to become rare. The same interest that once made you feel unique becomes an intermittent presence. And that's where the artificially created neediness is born, when the pattern that she herself established as normal begins to be withdrawn. And why does this work so well? Because your mind compares everything to the beginning. You don't want something extraordinary. You just want what you were before. But she knows that, and she uses that expectation as an emotional lever. When you start to question, she returns only a fraction of the original affection. A gesture, a warm phrase, a good night, a compliment that appears after days of coldness. And this small crumb of affection activates your entire emotional system again. The reward returns. The cycle restarts, and you become even more trapped. This type of manipulation works because it messes with the most basic logic of the human brain, the search for balance. When something you love is taken away, you do everything to bring it back. And without realizing it, you start working harder for the relationship than she does. You try to be calmer, more understanding, more patient, more dedicated. You make an effort, but in reality, you are just trying to recover the emotional pattern that she herself used as a trap. It is at this point that good men begin to lose themselves because they start to believe that the problem is with them, that they need to improve, mature, be more adaptable. And the more they try, the more deeply they become trapped in the emotional cycle that she controls. Deep down, she doesn't want to lose you, but she also doesn't want to set you free. She just wants to keep you emotionally available while she decides when, how, and how much to feed you attention. The reward mechanism doesn't work on its own. It needs the fertile emotional ground created by planned neediness. And in the next chapter, you'll understand why this oscillation between pain and relief is as powerful as a chemical addiction. What holds a man isn't constant affection. It's intermittent affection. It's the affection that comes and then disappears. It's the sweet message that appears after 3 days of silence. It's the intense attention that lasts an entire Sunday before turning into indifference on Monday. This pattern isn't accidental. It's the kind of mechanism that transforms relationships into emotional dependence because it mixes pain with reward in just the right measure to confuse the brain. And when the mind doesn't understand what's happening, it clings to what brings relief, even if it's precisely what causes the pain. Psychology calls this intermittent reinforcement, the same principle used in casinos, slot machines, and addictive apps. You don't receive the reward every time, nor regularly. You receive enough to keep trying, to keep investing, to keep believing that the bad phase will pass. And when it comes to toxic relationships, this dynamic is even more powerful because the reward isn't money, it isn't points, it isn't status. The reward is love. It's feeling desired. It's feeling important. It's feeling seen. And nothing is more addictive to human beings than the promise of emotional validation. The woman who masters this game doesn't need to be evil. She just needs to know how to use the alternation between affection and distance to keep you hooked. She gives you 70% of her attention at the beginning. Then, she reduces it to 20%. And when she realizes you're about to give up, she increases it to 50%. And so it keeps you emotionally almost satiated, but never complete. It's a cruel dance. When you feel pain, you chase after it. When you chase after it, it gives you just enough so you don't give up. And when you relax, it takes away again. The body reacts to this as it reacts to any addiction. Dopamine spikes with unexpected rewards. Cortisol rises in moments of uncertainty. Anxiety mixes with desire. And suddenly, you're deeply tied to someone who offers you less than you deserve but delivers exactly what you expect. This is where many good men get lost. They believe they are fighting for love. when in fact they are fighting for emotional stability. And this is the perfect game for someone who knows how to manipulate. The more unstable you become, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you become, the more she controls the pace. You are not addicted to her. You're addicted to the relief it offers you right after the pain it itself causes. That's the central knot. It's the psychological shackle. It's the poison that seems like a cure. And now, you're going to discover how this cycle creates the most dangerous illusion of all. The feeling that you need to prove yourself, even when you haven't done anything wrong. There's a moment in a toxic relationship that almost no one notices when it happens. It's subtle. It's silent. But it's the exact point where you start to lose control over yourself. The instant you start justifying yourself for things you didn't do, didn't say, and didn't intend to do. This doesn't start with accusations. It starts with insinuations. A short comment. You've been a little distant lately, haven't you? A disapproving look when you reply to a message late. An intentionally long sigh when you say you're going out with friends. She doesn't accuse you directly, but she makes you feel observed, evaluated, measured. And to avoid conflict, you start over-explaining. You start giving details that no one asked for. You start anticipating her reactions and molding yourself to avoid a bad atmosphere. This is the landmark of the beginning of emotional submission. Good men fall into this trap because they have a strong sense of responsibility. They want to do the right thing. They want to be fair. They want to avoid hurting someone they care about. And that's exactly what makes them vulnerable to the game. Psychology calls this stage anticipatory self-justification, a mental process where you try to avoid rejection by adjusting your behavior before anything even happens. And the most curious thing? You believe you're doing this voluntarily, but you're not. You're reacting to the emotional patterns she created, approaching when she wants you, distancing yourself when she wants control, approving when you give in, punishing with silence when you're authentic. Little by little, you enter problem avoidance mode. And those who live to avoid problems create even more problems within themselves. You stop expressing discomfort. You stop setting boundaries. You stop saying no. You stop disagreeing. You stop existing as an individual. And all of this seems like love, dedication, maturity. But it's fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear that a gesture of yours will make her distance herself and take with her that little bit of emotional relief she offers between storms. Constant self-justification creates a powerful illusion that if you explain yourself well, if you act right, if you do everything correctly, she will finally recognize your worth. But that never happens, because the goal of the game is not understanding. It's control. The more you explain yourself, the more she realizes that you fear disappointing her. And the more fear you show, the more power she feels she has. It's a cycle that slowly destroys your identity. You stop asking what she does for you and start worrying only about what you need to do to avoid being punished. This is the point where many good men become unrecognizable in their own eyes. But the game goes even deeper. In the next chapter, you'll understand how she transforms this fear into dependence and how she uses it to create the feeling that you're never enough, no matter how hard you try. There's a point in a toxic relationship where the man stops trying to please and starts trying to deserve. That's the psychological tipping point where the game changes. From here on, no matter what you do, nothing will be enough. And that's exactly what keeps you trapped. The mechanism is simple but devastating. She alternates small doses of validation with long periods of emotional distance. It's not an explicit withdrawal. It's a subtle cutoff of affection. She doesn't yell. She gets cold. She doesn't complain. She becomes silent. She doesn't argue. She disappears emotionally. And suddenly, you find yourself wondering what you did wrong. But there's no answer, because the problem isn't you, it's the cycle. Intermittent validation creates a much stronger dopamine release in the brain than constant validation. It's the same psychological effect as gambling. You never know when you're going to get the reward, and that's precisely what makes you try harder and harder. Good men fall for this easily because they carry a powerful inner belief. If I do everything right, I will be loved in return. But here, there is no right. There is only the endless search for the moment when she becomes sweet, attentive, and affectionate again, as she was in the beginning. That beginning that seemed perfect, but which you now realize was just the idealization phase, the showcase of her best self. And when you try to talk about the coldness, she responds with destabilizing phrases. You're exaggerating. Why are you so insecure? I just want some peace. You've been very needy lately. These phrases turn the tables. Now, you're not someone who's hurt. You're someone unstable, overly sensitive, difficult to deal with. It achieves the most dangerous effect, making you doubt your own discomfort. Over time, you start to believe that you're really the one who's wrong, that your effort isn't enough yet, that you need to prove more, give in more, offer more, love more. This is the engineering of insufficiency. You don't try to win love. You try to avoid its withdrawal, and this destroys your perception of self-worth. Notice the detail. She never openly says you're not enough. She just creates environments where you feel that way. And when finally she offers a smile, a hug, an affectionate message, you feel such intense relief that you confuse it with love. But it's not love. It's emotional abstinence being temporarily satisfied. And this relief becomes the reason why you continue, why you try, why do you accept situations that you once swore you would never tolerate. Deep down, you're not trying to win her over. You're trying to recover the version of her that existed before you fell in love. The problem? That version was never permanent, and it will never return because it doesn't need to return while you're stuck in the cycle. In the next chapter, we'll delve even deeper and reveal why good men were themselves out to the limit, trying to save a relationship that was already designed to keep them emotionally exhausted. And it is precisely here that the hidden reward mechanism becomes most dangerous. It makes the man believe that his patience is an investment and that abandoning what he has fought so hard for would be a personal defeat. The brain begins to act as an emotional counter, registering each attempt to save the relationship as if it were a credit that, sooner or later, would need to be returned. But that return never comes, and yet he continues to insist, fueled by the feeling that it's almost right. That almost never has a form, never a deadline, never guarantees, but has power, a devastating power. This man begins to rationalize everything he experiences. He justifies insults as moments of stress, aggression as emotional reactions, and selfishness as demonstrating a need for care. In this distortion, suffering becomes a mission, and pain becomes proof of love. Without realizing it, he begins to compete with himself, trying to overcome his own limits more and more, as if saving the relationship were an internal battle. When this dynamic takes hold, the relationship is no longer between two people. It is between him and his own illusion that he must continue. The male brain, especially when conditioned to effort and responsibility, creates an emotional trap. The idea that if I give up, no one will take care of her like I do. This phrase, silent and often unconscious, is more binding than any vow of love ever uttered. He begins to believe that his failure would mean leaving someone vulnerable, someone who needs him. But this need is rarely real. It is often manipulated, exaggerated, or strategically demonstrated to maintain emotional control. The reward mechanism becomes even more intense when, between long periods of exhaustion, a single moment of unexpected affection arises, a rare compliment, a gesture that seems like true love. These intermittent peaks of affection function like small doses of dopamine, just as happens in addictions. The man begins to wait, to desire, to work emotionally for that moment to return, even knowing that it lasts only a short time and comes at a high price. He accepts emotional crumbs as if they were banquets, Gradually, his self-esteem begins to mold itself to the shape of this relationship. He stops trusting his own perceptions, doubts his own needs, and begins to live for the next moment of approval. And the most dangerous thing of all, he believes that this cycle is love. He thinks that to love is to endure, that to love is to fix, that to love is to insist until it hurts. And so he distances himself from himself, losing his identity, his priorities, his limits. When he finally realizes that something is wrong, he is already too emotionally exhausted to react. He knows he is suffering, but he no longer knows who he would be without that dynamic. It's as if the relationship has taken the place of his own personality. And it is at this point that many men spend years or a lifetime trapped, believing that enduring is their function, that saving is their destiny, and that giving up would be an unforgivable failure. But none of that is love. It's emotional conditioning. It's emotional dependence disguised as loyalty. It's the reward mechanism operating silently, day after day, until the man forgets that he also deserves reciprocity, peace, respect, and real love. There's a silent myth, repeated for generations, that only fragile, emotionally needy, or weak men remain trapped in toxic relationships. Nothing could be further from a truth. In reality, the men who suffer the most in this type of relationship are precisely those considered strong, sensible, disciplined, and emotionally stable. Men who, from the outside, seem unshakable. Men who solve problems, carry responsibilities, who don't shy away from challenges, and therefore become the perfect victims of an emotional cycle that few talk about. They don't stay because they don't realize what's happening. They stay because they can't identify their own limits. These men carry within themselves an invisible code, duty. The duty to protect, to solve, to endure, to hold on. Society has taught them that love is synonymous with resistance, that giving up is a sign of weakness, and that a true man doesn't turn his back on chaos. He tidies up the house, picks up the wreckage, and tries again. This code, which should be strength, becomes a prison. Ultimately, the more responsible a man is, the more obligated he feels to continue, as if abandoning an unhealthy relationship were a moral failing, not an act of emotional survival. An intelligent, sensitive, and conscious man analyzes situations in depth. He understands traumas, comprehends behaviors, and perceives nuances. And this broad vision, which should protect him, makes him even more vulnerable. Because by understanding too much, he forgives too much. By understanding, he justifies. By justifying, he tolerates. He sees wounds in the other person and believes that his love can heal them, that his actions can transform them, that his patience can regenerate what is broken. He doesn't realize that, in this process, it is his own energy that is being drained drop by drop. In addition, intelligent men tend to have a more reserved emotional life. They don't easily open up. They don't know how to ask for help. They don't expose their deepest dilemmas. So they carry everything alone. And by carrying it alone, they convince themselves that maybe they are exaggerating. Maybe they're the problem. Maybe they're becoming too sensitive. Doubt is planted like a seed, and each emotional conflict acts as water to make it grow. Suddenly, that man who always had clarity finds himself confused, trapped in an emotional labyrinth that he himself tries to rationalize. Another silent aspect is the fear of loss. Not the loss of the person, but the loss of the narrative he has built. Intelligent men invest deeply in everything they build: careers, projects, plans, relationships. When they invest emotional time, they don't want to admit they chose wrong. The idea of starting over sounds like a waste, like a step backward, like admitting defeat. And it is precisely this fear of throwing everything away that makes them remain where there is no longer life. Deep down, the emotional intelligence of these men turns against them. They believe they can endure, adjust, adapt. And they can, but at the cost of themselves. The toxicity doesn't trap them through weakness, but through strength. And while they try to save a relationship, they don't realize that the ones who really need saving are themselves. Because it's not a lack of intelligence that keeps them there, it's an excess of hope. It's belief. It's commitment. It's the sincere desire to make it work, even when everything has already proven that it no longer makes sense. And so, brilliant men, capable of seeing the world in depth, end up blind precisely in the territory where they should see the most: love. Because no one ever taught them that leaving is also strength, that letting go is also courage, and that abandoning what hurts is not giving up. It is finally choosing oneself. The most important moment has arrived: the awakening. Men who have remained trapped in toxic relationships for years finally realize that true power lies not in trying to change someone who does not want to be changed, but in taking absolute control over their own lives. The liberation is not just physical, it is mental and emotional. It is when every decision, every choice, every thought becomes his again and not dictated by external expectations, subtle manipulations, or psychological games that drained his energy. It is a slow awakening, often painful but absolutely necessary. It is the moment when he understands that his worth does not depend on anyone's approval, and that his happiness does not need to be negotiated with behaviors that erode his self-esteem. When a man realizes he has been manipulated, that he has invested time, emotions, and resources in someone who offered no reciprocity, a mixture of anger and clarity arises. Anger is natural, but it is clarity that transforms. He understands patterns, identifies triggers, and realizes how he was conditioned to tolerate the intolerable. Each memory of devaluation becomes a lesson. Each moment of frustration becomes a tool for recognizing future signs. He begins to develop an internal radar, an ability to see beyond appearances, to identify toxic attitudes even before getting involved. This is the real prize, not the lost relationship, but the awareness gained. The rebuilt autonomy is accompanied by a redefinition of priorities. He reinvests in himself, in his body, mind, professional, and emotional growth. He discovers forgotten hobbies, resumes old friendships, and establishes boundaries he never dared to set. Each action is a reminder that life doesn't wait for others' approval, that it's not necessary to sacrifice mental health or dignity for attention or love that isn't genuine. The feeling of control generates confidence, not the superficial confidence based on external achievements, but the kind that comes from knowing he can face any challenge alone and still clearly choose who deserves to be by his side. And it is precisely at this point that future relationships change completely. A man who has gone through this journey does not return to old patterns. He does not accept games, emotional blackmail, or behaviors that disrespect his essence. He attracts women who match his energy, who respect boundaries, and who genuinely contribute to his life. Not through manipulation, not through games, but through a real alignment of values and intentions. The effect is almost instantaneous. The same man who once felt trapped is now admired and desired not for the strength of his submission, but for the integrity of his power. Before concluding, I want you to reflect. How many times have you allowed old patterns to define your emotional destiny? How many opportunities have you missed trying to save the unsavable? This is the turning point. And here's a concrete action for you. Start today to redefine your boundaries, your priorities, and your autonomy. Make choices that honor your essence and not anyone else's game. If you made it this far, share this video with a friend who needs to awaken to their own strength. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving real strategies to protect your energy, rebuild your value, and live, conscious relationships. The power has never been outside of you. It has always been within. Now is the time to reclaim it.